But in a situation where you find that a person look at the situation,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that.
All right, thank you for staying with us. And now to look at the dailies on Daybreak, we have in the studio Sunday Michael, Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust newspaper, to review some of the stories that made the headlines this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
My pleasure to be here again.
Excited to have you. All right, now let's begin with Daily Trust newspaper. Like we told you, the story there you would see on page 3, World AIDS Day, Nigeria's HIV response still donor funded. Well, to say that our own government needs to take a role and take responsibility there. 257 projects worth 20 billion naira duplicated in 2021 budget, and that's according to ICPC, one of Nigeria's regulatory bodies against corruption. The lead story says 20 die as boat capsizes with 47 pupils, others in Kano. With the rider, poor visibility hampers rescue operation. That's a very interesting story to look at. You'd see also the pictorial there, National Youth Service Corps members performing tug of war during the swearing-in ceremony of the 2021 Batch C Stream 2 at the orientation course at Kubwa in Abuja yesterday. Banishment. Apologize to Sanusi, court tells Kano government. Recall that yesterday there was a judgment by a court that seemed to exonerate the former emir. Well, the former emir. That's the only way to call it.
Yes, the former emir.
And yesterday the court is asking the Kano State government to apologize for the manner in which he was banished, from Kano State, taken to a secluded location,
confined
to a location, according
saying
to them, is based on the tradition.
And it's a violation of his human rights. That's what the court is saying.
Yes. All right. Now, Nigerians to apply for Forex online as CBN deploys eForm A. That's on page 20. You'll also find local content. FG saves 3.5 trillion naira on oil and gas projects, and that's on page 18 of the Daily Trust newspaper. At the bottom, you'll find also no killing at Lekki Tollgate. Lagos counters NSAS panel. With the riders, government accept 11 recommendations. Campaigners reject Sanwo-Olu's overtures. Now, yesterday, while the state governor was disclosing the position of this government based on the white paper that was,
released,
put together by the committee, he was also extending an invitation to the frontliners of the NSAS to come and walk with him. He called it a peace walk in Lagos State. And then there's a whole lot of detail about this story. You wouldn't want to miss this. You can grab a copy. The details is on page 5 of the Daily Trust newspaper. All
right, with that, we'll move on to the Nation newspaper, and we'll start with the lead here that says white paper, still talking about the Lekki toll gate, no arbitrary killings at Lekki toll gate. And we have a writer here that says Lagos accepts 11 #NSAS panel recommendations to take 14 requests to federal government. All right, we also have a story here, one that we should be worried about or not, on page 28, that says AFDB cautions federal government against tax increase. We also have another one on page 28 still that says INEC alleges plot by politicians to undermine BVA's application. All right, ICPC 257 duplicated projects found in 2021 budgets. Well, and a writer here that says Buhari orders agency to sanction corrupt civil services. And we'll take the final story on the front page of Nation newspaper here. And it says Abiodun presents 350.74 billion naira budget of restoration.
All right, now let's take a look at the Punch newspaper this morning. The first story there at the very top is the story about mushroom growers seeking inclusion in CBN program, the $45.3 billion market, and the details of that is on page 23. Then you also see petrol may sell above 340 per litre. Marketers plan imports amidst forex crisis. You'd also find retirees increase by 27%, collect 890 billion naira from government, private sector. Also, another story there says illegal recruitment. Buhari vows sanctions. ICPC indicts Ngige Ministry and others. And that's on page 13. The lead story on the Punch newspaper. Compulsory vaccination. Workers demand March. A deadline. Throng centers. FG insists on December 1. So yes, today is the deadline for civil servants, workers, federal government workers who are yet to be vaccinated to get vaccinated. Otherwise, they would have no access to their various offices. Also, the writers there will say, our letter for March extension will get to government today, says ASCSN. You would also see, we are not contemplating any extension after December 1 deadline. PSC. Security operatives bar workers without face mask from government buildings. You'll also find the picture there showing you NDLEA destruction of 50 billion naira drugs, arrest 10,355 traffickers. There showing you that took place yesterday. You'd also see gunmen in police uniform invade Oshun Microfinance Bank, loot ATM. Also another story, Ogun plans 360 billion naira IGR. Abiodun proposes 351 billion naira budget, and also 300,000 children newly infected with HIV in 2020. That's according to the UNICEF. That's quite an alarming number. At the very bottom, Lagos rejects panel's casualty figure, says one killed in Lekki. Akeredolu orders Ondo nightclubs closure, alleges Zamfara boys peddling drugs, hawking sex. Also, you'd find 40 festival-bound passengers drown as overloaded canoe boat capsizes. That's on page 6 of the Punch newspaper. Okay. Very tragic.
Yes, all right. So we'll take the final newspaper, and which is the Guardian newspaper. And we have, today being World AIDS Day, 1.9 million Nigerians living with HIV. Infection rates not decreasing fast enough. And you'll find that story on page 2. Buhari talks tough on grant as ICPC uncovers 20.138 billion naira duplicated projects. We also have Lekki Tollgate, which seems to, be on the front page of every newspaper today. No deaths at Lekki Tollgate, says Lagos government in #NSAS white paper. And then we have EFCC arraigns Ondo Speaker, others over alleged fraud, and you find that story on page 6. Right at the bottom, you'll find a story that says how I championed the scuttling of Obasanjo's elongation plan, and that's by Senator Ben Obi. And then we'll move on to the lead story on the Guardian newspaper here that says subsidy removal won't spike inflation, says World Bank. Well, there's been a lot of reports saying that once the subsidy is removed, fuel would shoot up to 300 and something naira, and Nigerians seem to be afraid of that fact. But then we have some writers here that says data contradicts Chowdhury's argument. Nigeria tops table of all wrong data. Social scheme doesn't benefit majority of poor people, and economy cannot grow faster with business as usual management approach. And these are the stories we'll take on front page of the Guardian newspaper.
Well, very, very interesting stories. Now, let's get perspectives on these headlines. We earlier told you that we have Sunday Michael in the studio, Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust newspaper, to give perspectives to this. Now, finally, the white paper is out. This conversation about the NSAS protest at the Lekki toll gate, well, I would say has finally been put to rest, isn't it? Again, we are seeing also invitations by the governor to, for a peace walk and all of that. What are your thoughts, around this story?
A couple of things. First of all, I think it is important to commend the Lagos State government. They've been very careful in managing expectations around these reports. I know a couple of days back there were conversations around whether or not we will even see a white paper, right? Today, they've gone beyond that. They've been bold enough to issue the white paper. It may not be everything we expected, but the fact that they could accept some recommendations, modify some recommendations, we have moved away from where we used to be. I mean, they went from setting up a judicial panel, funding it, and then taking the recommendations from them and accepting some, saying some others, as we rightly pointed out before today, do not exactly fall within their purview in terms of implementations, and they would therefore forward those recommendations to the federal government. I think the major bone of contention now it's it's around the casualty figures. What I don't know is, we know there were a lot of testimonies about how the committees arrived at these numbers. What the government did not tell us in its briefing is what other investigation did it do to disprove these numbers. So hard facts are not easy to take in, but if you're also disproving it, we want to understand how, because the committee made some chilling revelations, of how agencies of government showed up after the shooting to do a mop-up and a clean-up of the scene. Because if the scenes were not tampered with, perhaps the forensic investigations would have been able to pick up blood samples and tissues and compare to the so-called 99 dead bodies that were found in the morgue that all seem to have been tagged SARS. That's one fact that has not been disproved. The second thing is, the testimonies about the bodies came from the government pathologist. It wasn't from an outsider. It is difficult to disprove that. If he has the authentic numbers of all the deaths and the circumstances around the deaths, and we saw 99 dead bodies with bullet wounds, and the state pathologist, who is the chief authority with regards to that, had confirmed this, that is also a fact that you can just throw out of a window, right? And they had bullet wounds. So if they were not coming from the Lekki toll gate, at least some kind of investigation should tell us where they are coming from. That's another thing that was not attended to. Another important information was, they said they listed 3 because the government released money to carry out what do you call it now? The forensic test on only 3 bodies. That if they had gotten money to do on the 99, they would have been able to, with the people who complained about missing relatives, they would have been able to compare DNAs and all of that to show whether there is really a relationship. And they gave instances that when the building collapse happened at the synagogue church, that those were the processes that they carried out to ensure that there was no mass burial. They were able to marry every dead body to relatives and claims, and therefore allow people to recoup their cadavers and give them the kind of burials. So, gray areas on both sides, but what's important is that we have made some progress. The governor is suing for peace. I hope the leaders of this campaign also see this olive branch and accept it, not because it meets all of their aspirations, but because it's also the way forward.
Okay, so how would you say the government respond? What would you say is the government's response to a peaceful protest or protests in general in Nigeria?
It's been abysmal. The records are in the open. We seem to react very violently, unfortunately, as a state, to peaceful protests. It's funny, I can count several on the back of my hand. Remember the Two-Face proposed protest about the state of the economy at the time, and it was truly biting. Whether it is not a universal truth, the fact that he feels the need to protest about what he doesn't feel comfortable about, and people were willing to join. I mean, the state should not have prevented it. The Commissioner of Police in Lagos, they openly came out and said that cannot hold because of security implications. Well, you would not take those kind of warnings for granted, but the Constitution also provides that you must provide protections for peaceful protests. We know how many times the Shiite people had attempted to protest in Abuja, and every time there is a casualty, whether on the part of the protesters or sometimes, in fact, because of the violent reactions, even the police have had to bear some. We know one or two police officers that have lost their life.
Even innocent Nigerians.
You know, what happened to the Bring Back the Girls protest? We are all public witnesses to how senior citizens of this country were brutalized because they demanded to speak with the president. Is that a crime? You know. So we have seen several kinds of protests. The way protests are quailed, you know, rather than invite people to have a conversation, you know, rather than being seen to be attending to the genuine issues of concern, we either find a way to forcefully disperse them, you know, using water canisters and all of that, or using all manner of force. We know how Charlie Boy was roughly manhandled on the street. You know, so the examples abound. It has made it difficult for people to want to participate in peaceful protests. But that is also dangerous for democracy. Today, you think they don't have justifiable reasons to come out. But it was the same protest that secured the peace, the progress, the freedom that these same leaders have ridden on, you know, to become what they are today. So we cannot allow any kind of government whatsoever to you know, perpetually find a way to stop what is a fundamental, a universally recognized human right, because that is the only way people can express what they feel about a government pronouncement, policy, or action, or even demand some kind of change where they need be.
All right. Now, would you say that, well, with this report, with this outcome, everything has been put to rest? What do we expect to see going forward?
I think it will be difficult to say everything had been put to rest. Right from yesterday, even prior to the release of the report yesterday evening, there were already reactions. People are not satisfied with the outcome of the government. People are not comfortable with the government discrediting a judicial panel that is set up by itself. And I think the government also anticipates that this will not sit completely well with people. So the whole peace walk is an attempt to quell those possible tensions. So it has not put everything to rest, quite frankly. And all those gray areas then needs to be taken up, you know, seriously. The government has said they will set up a helpline, you know, a toll-free helpline to report issues of violence and all of that. We hope that progresses quickly. And it is not just about people calling to report that something had happened. It's about people seeing that real actions are taken about these incidences, you know. So the government needs to do more other than just coming out and saying, we will take this, we will not take this, we will recommend this forward, and we will modify this. Real conversations, real engagements needs to now start happening between the leaders and the led. The NSAS protest is a wake-up call that people would not continue to sit down and swallow everything hook, line, and sinker. The day they get to the wall, they will bounce.
Okay, so one of the reasons that the Lagos State government is, you know, banking on as why they will not accept the casualty figure and all of that is that the report did not spell out, you know, the way and manner or how those persons that were said to have been killed, you know, died, and that it's more speculative and it's more on assumptions, you know. So, and if you look at some of the facts that have been established by the panel, like the one we mentioned about, you know, government authorities or some government officials coming to the scene, you know, tampering with the space, where investigation was supposed to have been conducted. Is that an indictment, or I would say, is that a dent, I would say, on that, the process? Is that a justifiable ground, looking at the antecedents of what happened after, the supposed killing?
It will be difficult for the government to justify that. They did a number of things on their part that tampered with even the outcomes, if you like. So why was it difficult to provide the cameras at the toll gates? And the agency in charge of those cameras alluded to the fact that the cameras were safe and they were entered. So why was it difficult for us to see footages? That is unexplained. Why was it difficult for the army to allow the panel to access the military morgue? They couldn't provide explanations. Even the camera that they saw at the venue, why was it difficult to release the content of the camera? Who ordered the cleanup of that space after the shooting? What did you clean up? Those bullet canisters. What about the physicians that were purportedly said to have showed up in hospital, removing the bullets in the bodies of those cadavers? Because if you bring out the bullets, they have serial numbers, they have model, we can trace them to the manufacturers, and we can trace them from the model to who they were sold to. Why were they removed? These are all questions that they couldn't provide answers for. Like I said, then you will even want to question who studied the report of the panel and came up with this recommendation. We want to know the faces behind the committee that brought out this white paper, because the messenger is as important as the message. Was it as independent enough? Because if you are working to an answer and you want to paint the government good, obviously the result of your effort will be known even before you set out, depending on the quality of people. So if there were doubts, if you had cast aspersions about the positions of the decision, how neutral was the government committee that reviewed the outcome of the panel report? These are all questions you and I cannot provide ready answers to. So until we understand those things, then we can begin to draw some kind of conclusions.
All right, so let's move on to another story. What are your thoughts on the court ruling on the banishment of the former Emir Sanusi?
It's a fairly tricky one. I think suffice it to say that the banishment has never been a judicial matter. It has always been cultural. There had never been any law in Nigeria as we know today, even from prehistoric era, that permits banishment of any form. If you recall, the court had made pronouncements, not even with the case of Sanusi or an emir, but even with where we have the caste system in the East, where people are regarded as outcasts, and therefore when things happen, you banish them. So, the court has always kicked against that. Fundamentally, it's against our rights as a people, because we have the freedom of movement, the freedom to settle wherever you chooses. And so it's not within anybody's purview to then decide whether or not you should stay in a place or not. But culturally, traditionally, historically, when emirs are dethroned, they are banished. And the historical or cultural explanation is that although you can be dethroned, but you cannot be dekinged. Technically, even though you are not a throne, you are not on the throne, you have a followership, there is a court followership that continues to exist, and that will continue to show allegiance to you for the rest of your life. And because they cannot risk allegiance to two different authorities, the idea of banishment is to give space for whoever is then in charge to hold sway fully. So that is what informed even the banishment of Sanusi's father, Festo Azare, and then when somebody wanted to help him, as history told us, they brought him closer to Wudil, but definitely not into Kano. And we have seen Emir of Gwandu to Kaduna. We have seen the former Sultan of Sokoto also to Kaduna. We know the cases of others that went to Lokoja. And all that. So that has been historical antecedent. And so when Sanusi first challenged it, he didn't even question the historical relevance of it. He was in fact saying he needed the freedom, because those days when they banish you, it becomes like a house arrest sort of. You really don't have the freedom to move around, but you can go to the mosques, to your house, a few places, but you can't really move around freely. So the initial relief he sought was to allow him the freedom to move around, because he was banished to Aware, and when that relief was granted, it allowed him. So this pronouncement, if you like, is retrospective in a way, because Emir Sanusi, or the 13th Emir as he likes to be called, or former Emir of Kadu, has been moving around quite a lot, as we have come to know even from media report. And in fact, I think he's somewhere in London now taking a PhD program. So that movement has been happening. But I think it's important that this pronouncement is happening. What we don't know is that in the face of this pronouncement, how the people or the emirate will react should Sanusi then decide to visit Kano, because that will change completely change the historical narrative about banishment and all of that. We look forward to how that plays out.
All right. Now, other stories are here that sad ones, really. The lead story talks about 20 die as boat capsizes with 47 pupils, others in Kano. This is not the first of it. Again, we ask the questions. Are we learning from these tragedies?
We clearly are not learning. As you would know, I spent about 6.5 years in Lagos, and I had, on a number of times, the opportunity to use the waterways. And in fact, I did a story some 1 or 2 years ago to the effect that our waterways are the most unregulated. The government doesn't even see it as anything happening, whether as a potential for full-scale transportation or anything. So it's an unregulated space. And to that effect, people who can afford it go to some construction house, put whatever they can put together and put a propeller on it, and they're on the water body, transporting people, as a matter of fact. So if you were doing it for just yourself, then maybe people would say, well, if you trust it to carry you and anything happens, that's you. But to think that they would then deploy these kind of things for mass transportation, and nobody is looking at the quality of what they had built in the name of a boat. Nobody is looking at safety measures as to what is even the capacity of this boat, what should it carry as a standard weight, load factor. Nobody is looking at safety measures in terms of are your passengers putting on life vests. Nobody is regulating what time of the day is safe to use this water. They are not getting any kind of meteorological feeds.
Yes, and in fact, from this story, from what we know, the incident actually happened in the night.
Yeah. So you can imagine, you probably don't have any kind of lighting. It could have been a collision. It could have been some obstructions that you probably run into. Today, we are not completely abreast with what the facts are. We just know it's a capsize. It could have even been a fault that would have shown signs of little leaks and all of that, but could not be detected because of the time of the day, and then you jump on it, or even somebody damning all the consequences, because nobody can stop him to say, whatever this fault is, we can manage it to the other side and then find a way to fix. So it's a completely unregulated space, whether by the federal agencies or even the state agencies. So it's an all-comers affair, and therefore we continue to see incidences like this. And like you rightly mentioned from the beginning, are we learning anything from this example? And the answer clearly is no.
But we also have communities that can only be accessed, by water. So what happens to these communities? The
truth is, people would always find ways to to exist, whether you choose to pay attention to what they are doing or not. When we say pay attention in this case, it's about government living up to its responsibility. Wherever these persons are, there is some form of government present in their location, whether it's the local government or even the state government, whatever it is. The thing is, we cannot pretend that nothing is happening on our water surface, you know, because like you rightly mentioned, quite a number of our communities live in those kind of circumstances, and it is our responsibility to ensure as a people, as a community, that they travel safely through and for their destination, and that whatever they do on the water bodies is done in compliance with international best practice.
All right. Well, I would like for us to take a quick break now, and then when we come back, we'll be taking a look at some more stories on the papers. Please stay with us.
Get latest updates on current topical issues and breaking news by downloading the TrustTV mobile app on your Android devices. Go online, click Google Play Store, search TrustTV, install the app, and get doses of unfiltered information on happenings all over the world in your pocket. TrustTV, documenting the Nigerian story.
Sorry about that, sir. I think I left here around 10:30 as well. Issues,
Get latest updates on current topical issues and breaking news by downloading the TrustTV mobile app on your Android devices. Go online, click Google Play Store, search TrustTV, install the app, and get doses of unfiltered information on happenings all over the world in your pocket. TrustTV, documenting the Nigerian story.
All right, thank you for staying with us. You are still watching Daybreak on Trust Television. Now, we've been looking at the stories that made the headlines with Sunday Michael, Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust newspaper, getting perspectives on the lead stories. Let's take a look at this one here about the budget, 2021 budget. The ICPC is raising an alarm that 257 projects worth 20 billion naira were duplicated in 2021 budget. That's an alarming number there. What exactly is going on with our budgets?
I wish I can tell you. First of all, alarming. But I tell you, from the number of years I've had to deal with budget reporting, that this is just the tip of the iceberg. And it will make sense if you begin to cascade backwards. If you have been able to find this much in 2011, if those people who did it were there in 2010, you can be sure that there was something in it. If they were there in 2009, you can be sure that those pardons happened. Two things that had come to the fore with this is the fact that, first of all, we used to hear about budget pardon in the National Assembly. Now, the ICPC is establishing that it is even more with the MDAs than it is at the National Assembly. It doesn't exonerate what the National Assembly does with pardon or no pardon. Secondly, personally, I'm wondering, why is this coming 1 year after? What would have happened if, say, the federal government haven't compiled or put together what its compendium? Why not send it to the ICPCs or the EFCCs to have done this forensic checks, interrogation or analysis, and return to the president to be guided, rather than allow this kind of embarrassment? As we're talking, it's not about their discovering. The money have been chopped, like somebody said. You know, so 257, like I said, it's just the tip of the iceberg. And the way corruption works is, if you do for 10 naira and you succeed, you'll be emboldened to do 15 naira, and then you move on to 15 naira, and then your greed would then move to the hundreds, to the thousands, to the millions and all that. So if we even understand what they had looked at for, they probably had just discovered just a fraction of this thing. So if we subject this more, we will find more. It is so because the budget is over 10,000 line items. 10,000. Who in this world has the energy to start, you know, looking at each of those line items? And so the opportunity for pardon is huge. And that is why subjecting them to this kind of scrutiny is very important, even before it gets to the assembly, you know. And so
but wouldn't it have taken the whole time? I mean, look at it. Probably that is one of the reasons why it took a while, you know, for them to even come up, you know, with this report. So is there a way of streamlining this budget? Because, you know, like you mentioned, it looks so bogus, and interrogating it, you know, is quite a very huge task. So is there a way of, you know, streamlining these budgets in a more simpler, you know, way and manner?
I don't know how that is going to look. What we are actually supposed to strengthen is the budget office. Should be strengthened to be able to do this kind of checks, and that is why we have the privilege of technology. You should be able to dictate replications, right? Even at the back of your fingers, you know, by just imputing parameters and a search through those parameters to even bring out replications. Where there are no replications, you can even use certain parameters. For instance, so if you say you want to build classrooms, what they do is they can decide to replicate that classroom construction in 2 or 3 places within the budget. You could search up classrooms. And when it brings out all of the classrooms search for you, you then begin to look at the fine notes and ask questions. You want to build 4 classrooms here, given, taken. You also want to build this other 4, where is it? So if you say 4 classrooms in Zaria, and then you go to, you come again to another place, you say another 4 classrooms in, let's say, Congo. Whoever does a simple search knows that Congo is also in Zaria. You have just used one nomenclature to change, to make it look like there is a violation. Somebody should be asking those questions. A second eye should be merely looking at the quality, the sanctity of what is proposed.
Isn't it why we do budget defense, you know, at the National Assembly and all of that?
if the executive that have all the MDs and everything that took some 6 months to prepare these templates, you know, are unable to clean up these things, it will be difficult for some 108 people in the National Assembly to really do a thorough job on this. And then you know how funny these things, budgets are provided, and even the civil society and the media don't get the complete template around these things. It's a struggle for them to even release this, because this is where the media would have been able to help, you know. If not directly at the point of presenting the budget, you can use the same templates to do monitoring and evaluation, to then begin to say, you provided for 12 classrooms in total, but I mean, on our inspection, we found only 4. Where are the other 8? And if they know that those kind of checks would regularly come forward, perhaps it will reduce the tendency to pad the budget to this extent.
Okay, well, now that, you know, the report is out, you know, what do you think the government can actually do about it? And are we likely to find such replications in the 2022 budget?
I can beat my chest and say yes, it will be in the 2022 budget. If we care to look, just use whatever template the ICPC had used to bring this out, to look deeply into the 2022, that's one. 2, the president was blowing hot. I hope it is not just for the sake of the cameras, you know, because until you begin to fish out people who are responsible for these things and try them and jail them, the people who come after would not learn anything. You know, the way we behave in this country is, if somebody is caught, they say, no, he's not smart enough. If he was smart, he wouldn't have been caught. Other people will come up with the impression that, no, it's because he ate alone. If he had shared the spoils among everybody, he would have covered it. You know, so, but now that this is in the open, we should be able to drill down to how those items find their way into the budget and establish those things and try people. And they should be seen to be tried openly and jailed openly. And that's the only way we can foster not completely eradicate it, but at least reduce it to a barest minimum.
All right. Well, we'll have to end the discussion here. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for coming.
And having these thoughts with us. We've been speaking with Sunday Michael. He is the deputy business editor, Daily Trust newspaper. Thank you so much. We look forward to having you again.
Thank you.
Yes.
But in a situation where you find that a person look like the same,
Not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that